Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Governance Committee of Council to order. I'm Councillor Debbie Sharma, chairperson of this committee. It's March 11th, 2025. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. Joining me is Councillor John Orlico, Councillor Jason Schreier, and Councillor Sean Dobson, members of this committee representing various community committees throughout the city. We have our city clerk, Mr. Carlos Camero, and our deputy city clerk, Mr. Andrew Poitras. We have 2 items on the agenda. We'll start with delegations. Do we have minutes?
Could I have moved that the minutes of the meeting held on December 3rd, 2024 be taken as read?
Thank you, Councillor Dobson. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary? It's carried. Now moving to delegations, Mr. Clerk.
Yeah, so our first delegation registered today, we have in person joining us, Kelly Ryback, to be heard in opposition to the City of Winnipeg Governance Review, which is item 2 on the agenda.
Welcome, Kelly.
Great, thank you very much. Glad to be here. Glad for the opportunity to be engaged in city business. The first item on number 3, making appointments to EPC, that the mayor consider having all wards represented over time. It's a novel concept. There are 15 councillors that would have to go through EPC over a 4-year period. That's in itself is a worthy of consideration, but it is a daunting task. First off, you have rookie councillors who are just finding their way, that they shouldn't or couldn't be considered for EPC for the first little while, be it 12 months, 18 months, as they get accustomed to learning and experienced. Secondly, that if this were to be undertaken, I wish that it also includes that the succession and continuity be considered, that a new appointment to a standing policy committee, who then that chair becomes onto EPC, that the appointment of the standing policy committee chair should be from within that standing policy committee, so that there is continuity. And that was a recent example that when Councillor Eadie was made chair of water, sewer and waste, that he came from within that committee. So maybe that could be added to the item. Number 6, procedure bylaw number 50, 2007 be amended. This is to address the marathon meetings. And my heart goes out to you, because not only are there large quantity of agenda items, the reports and the submissions, you can't read it all. And you hope that your executive assistant assists you with a Reader's Digest version of the executive summary in order to do it. It is a daunting task. And what attributes to that is the quantity of agenda items, the quantity of delegates on any item, be it written submission or in person, especially when the agenda item is of high interest or contentious. We've had where you have agenda items with 20, 30, 40 delegates, both written and in person. And how do you limit the repetition? And I know there was a recent property meeting where the chair asked for, after the initial presentations, that any following be at 5 minutes. But sometimes it can be difficult to put 5 minutes into a presentation because of the content and the compassion and desire with that, because you're affecting livability, safety, property, and other items. But another item that attributes to the marathon meetings is the quantity of questions after delegation. And when a meeting starts, and sometimes a meeting can't start because of councillors being late and we don't have a quorum, and you have to wait for that quorum to exist if you know that councillor's on way, or meetings do get postponed. That I do support the recording of arrival and departure times if they're late or leaving early, but I also recommend that you add to not only recording it in the minutes, but there be an annual report on performance by councillors on attendance. I also ask that it also be recorded in the meetings, the start time and the end time of the meeting, and an annual report by committee or council on the frequency of times that they started meetings late. And out of respect for the delegates' time, out of respect for the clerk's time and performance in general, the meetings should be a hard target to start on time. But it is more frequently they start late than they actually do start on time. And I appreciate that today, as we're talking about this, that this meeting started on time. But it is not uncommon for a meeting to start 20 minutes late. You could have gone through 2 to 3 delegates in that period. And it is a function of the responsibility of the counselor to arrive on time. Also, the number of times they are not in attendance should be recorded on an annual basis. With reducing, how do you reduce the marathon meetings? One, you reduce the quantity of agenda items. You will be realizing that once the Housing Accelerator Fund as of right is implemented, so you'll have less rezoning meetings, you'll have less appeals, you'll have less building plan approval meeting items on the agenda. Quantity of delegates, we talked about how to reduce that repetition. Maybe there's a better way of getting opinions and feedback or positions as opposed to having written submissions or delegates appear in person. And maybe it's through a registered poll or other means. I can't give you all the solutions for that, but that's something for discussion. How can you repeat the repetition? Because you could have 30 delegates all saying the same thing. And if they're not orchestrated and combined, I can tell you in one case when it came to a council meeting and council where only 2 opposing and 2 supporting are allowed, and the second one is only allowed 5 minutes. I have seen where individuals have combined so that it's a 15-minute presentation in 3 stages and they're not repeating each other. But that requires organization. But just how can you reduce that repetition? My concern is a hard limit, like actually saying we go from 10 minutes to 5. Because some presentations do require that detail, and you're accustomed to me. I do know that extensions are allowed at 10 minutes, and you would allow extensions on 5 minutes, provided that they remain topical. But it's just, you want to hear opinions, you want to foster engagement. I do have a concern with changing from 10 minutes to 5. But I think one of the bigger contributors to the marathon meetings comes down to question period. And I've seen the speaker several times ask the counselor, what is your question, after they've gone on for 3 minutes. My most recent, second most recent appearance, a counselor made a statement for 2 minutes addressing me, not relevant to the topic, and there wasn't a question. Okay, so we'll give you different examples. The St. James Assiniboine School Division, and for delegates, you have 10 minutes to speak. It is directed to the board, which is trustees and senior administration. They are not to challenge the speaker. Their questions are to provide clarity and ask the why. It's very clear. It does not become a debate. It is not to express a trustee or board member's opinion. And I think you could save that for deliberation. And when you go to vote, that if a counselor doesn't agree with a delegate's opinion, they could voice that to the other counselors in deliberation or discussion with the public service, not to debate or try to discredit the delegate. And that happens far too often here. And that turns into marathon meetings in an extended period of time. In Calgary, bylaw 35M 2017, members must keep comments relevant to the issue. We have seen examples where counselors have made comments that are not relevant to the actual topic, and where the speakers either cut them off or has asked for the question. And I myself have faced questions that are not relative to the topic. And the most recent example, the mayor advised me not to answer it because it was not on topic. And we need to avoid debate with delegates. And you will have, if the delegate is more respected and we're more effective and the meetings aren't drawn out and we can get through an agenda, you will have probably more delegates appearing with relevance. But I've seen, and the worst example is when a counselor is a delegate and it becomes a free-for-all of a debate going on. And the worst case that I've encountered, I've been here for 4 years, is one counselor presented as a delegate and it went on for 40 minutes at EPC. And the mayor allowed it to happen where a third counselor chimed in twice, point of order, did not like the tone or the direction it was going, but the mayor allowed it to happen. And I was a delegate, appear later because counselors get to go first, whether they're registered or not. 40 minutes caused me to get a parking ticket. And I'm thinking I'm third delegate. I end up being 5th and couldn't get through until noon. And delegates ticked off because they're not getting through the agenda and have to be here post lunch, etc. Calgary. Members must keep comments relevant to the issue at hand, not engage in arguments. Edmonton, if you want further engagement, Edmonton, their agendas are published 10 days prior to the week of the meeting. So there's more attention. I can tell you that when you're debating the grant intake, their recipients of the grant intake flustered because they only found out about it 2 days before the meeting. Whereas, we need more time for published agendas and have living agendas that can be maybe finalized at a certain date prior to the meeting, but published earlier than that. Councillors use questions time to make statements and questions that don't appear. I've strictly talked to that. Councillors ask questions to posture and attempt to prove the delegate wrong or discredit the delegate. Save it. Save it for debate where it matters, not debating delegates. I ask you to recommend the policy to limit questions and the time for clarity, for background, and to ask a why. Calgary statement to encourage public engagement. Voice opinion to council members and can provide clarity and new perspectives on the matters or issues being considered, which can influence council's decision. We want to be heard. And and as we're on talking about being heard and having engagement and making meetings more effective, there does need to be more activity at the ward level or the standing policy committee with the public before these items come on agenda. So then maybe we can have that discussion to voice our opinions in an informal meeting with the standing policy committee or with the ward councillor. And then we can be satisfied that we've been heard and if those are taken forward to the actual meeting. The other challenge is, as delegates, you've seen that delegates appear at a community committee. They have the same message at the standing policy committee. They have the same message at EPC. And if they're within the two, they have the same message at council. So as a delegate, to think that I need to be heard to influence so that if I can have the influence that my opinion can reach majority, I need to come 4 times? And that's not effective. That's not respected. I am done. I thank you to ask again as Calgary. Please try and improve engagement and for your purposes, reduce the marathon meetings. Yes.
Comments, questions? Councillor Schreier.
Yeah, and thanks, Kelly Ryback. I have a question for you, but now it might be inherently contradictory to what you're asking. You're saying we need to avoid debate with delegates. I don't know if it's going to debate, but to draw out the delegates based on what they say and draw them out and help explain it. I guess that could become a debate. I don't know. Are we debating right now? I like asking questions of the delegates sometimes. It might be that there's an inherent contradiction, but that between the point of view of the delegate and myself. But that is part of the democratic process. That is part of optimizing the time of the delegate. That's the way I look at it. So you're saying we need to avoid debate with delegates, but then how do we help structure thought if it's not through debate? I think that's what we do here.
I appreciate that, Councillor Schreier, and I appreciate the questions you've always asked of me in delegation. But they do need to be on topic. Secondly, I'm not an elected official. So your purpose of debating me does not impact I can't vote on it. So why are you trying to convince me if I'm wrong? But if you think I'm wrong, then raise that in deliberation with your fellow members. And I'm very appreciative when I watch the deliberation after delegation is done, when a councillor would say, well, one delegate brought this point forward and I disagree, or one delegate brought this point forward and I agree. And I think it's at least worthy of consideration. Take that point, and if you think I've had an influence with other councillors and you disagree, then your debate is with the council where it comes to vote, not me.
So Kelly, you have a point. However, with what Councillor Schreier is saying, makes a lot of sense to me as well. When a delegate comes forward, we pose a question to get more information out of them, and they appreciate that because they ultimately get more time to speak. Now, to your point, about a counselor mentioning what the delegate said during debate time. There isn't always debate time on every item. It would have to be stood down to make the point, and time's lost. It's sometimes better in the here and now, right during delegation time, to ask the question. And if the delegation does not know the answer or does not wish to respond to that particular question, that's fair as well.
Right. But I do appreciate at the St. James Savoy School Division, which I've been a delegate and have a very good working relationship with the trustees and the superintendents and various directors, because I put a lot of programs through that school division. I do appreciate where they don't want based on their policy, the trustee does not voice an opinion against the delegate. It's not the purpose. They do talk it about amongst themselves. I appreciate the questions that allow me to provide more clarity and information, or get to the heart as to why I'm presenting and the impact.
Fair enough.
But when somebody goes on, it's too often that somebody, a counselor, will speak for minutes to make a statement, be it with a delegate or you, right?
There are times as well, and you've seen this, where delegations are not sharing correct information. So that's another opportunity for counselor to correct the record right there and now, because it corrects it for those watching on live stream, in the gallery, and those around the chamber.
Yeah, and I feel that there's points of order,
Right.
majority of the time are valid, and that would be a case for that.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation.
I have one question.
Yeah,
So
Councillor,
another one that you may not like or you do like is the "Are you aware?" questions.
Yeah.
What do you think of those? 'Cause
I
have
hate,
one for you right now.
I hate them.
Yeah, so are you aware that your initial comment about in 4 years' time, EPC has to be represented by all 15 boards? The motion doesn't say that. It doesn't say during a 4-year span. Are you aware of that? It could be over 8 years. It could be longer.
It doesn't specify that at all,
There you go.
but for all wards to be represented,
Doesn't
yeah.
say in one term, though, does it?
over time.
Are you aware? Are you aware that it doesn't say that during one term?
yeah, you're correct.
I'm
on
using that point, as an example. Yeah.
And
Thank you, Kelly. Councillor Gorlico, thank you for that. I was going to make that point as well. And the annual report you alluded to, Kelly, that's a good point. We do have something similar already that's presented, and a report based on attendance that's there for the public record to review. It's a communication piece, I believe, at council. The 5-minute speaking time you mentioned, there's always extensions, so that's available. We did try it out recently during malls and corridors hearings, and it seemed like we had very impactful presentations in that condensed time of 5 minutes. So it seemed to have been working. The continuity on committees, that's a good point you raised. Councillors often choose to be on different committees every year. It's their prerogative. We have discussions amongst council to see who will serve on what committee. That succession may not, we may not have the ability to do this succession the way you're saying. Councillors also have a responsibility to read agenda items on all committees, because ultimately we vote at them at council. So obviously, if you're on a committee, you may know the role more in depth, but we do have an obligation to know about all reports we vote on. So,
Yes.
and it's a learning curve, of course, when someone goes to a new committee, and I think councillors are up for the challenge if they choose to be on a certain committee.
And
There's a lot
again-
to learn, and new and emerging issues on each committee that even the chair would not be aware of prior to.
right.
So
No, and it is, I'm empathetic towards just how much information is
lots of
before you.
information, and you did make that point.
But I've also have been witness of where it's evident that committee members have not read the report, which is concerning at the SPC level or at the community committee level.
Sometimes a misunderstanding. We're striving for plain language, and that's why
Right.
we ask questions to the administration. All of those opportunities to do to all of that.
An example of that witness is a committee member asking a question of the public service. And the public service says, well, it's in the report. The response was, it's in the report.
It's in the report.
But-
Sometimes not as clear as it could be.
Right.
Thank you for your points
Appreciate that.
today. Thank you for your energy. We see you a lot.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Our next delegation, we have joining us remotely via Zoom, David Grant, speaking with respect to item 2.
Hi,
David,
thanks
hello.
thanks for the opportunity to speak. And thanks to Kelly for his compassion and his valuable comments. I thank Councillor Schreier for his frequent interactions when I've been a delegate. I'd suggest that none of those have been combative or off topic. And I was very impressed with the chair's comments just now on how things go at meetings and on governance in general. It shows that she's very well attuned to what's going on. On a related matter, attendance at City Hall, SPCs and council and so on, is much more controlled than at many boards that I've been a part of, with motions required to excuse. Quite often you show up and there's 8 out of 12 board members and nobody knows why the other 4 aren't there. At City Hall, things are much more businesslike, where if somebody's away in a conference, that is mentioned, and otherwise they're in attendance. Anyway, the MNP review lists City Hall governance processes. I noticed that there are a number of governance failures which are not noted in the report. It strikes me that maybe the public input and quotes search for weaknesses quotes part of the process that involved MNP was not adequate. They didn't do an awful lot of searching for what goes wrong. Obviously, Kelly and the chair today are much more aware of what's going on and what needs improvement than the MNP folks were. So they sort of missed the boat on the did you knows. On the topic of verbal only reports, I'd suggest that they are used too frequently. They prevent actual public input based on that particular report, and they thus prevent transparency. And we know that whenever the word is used, it's that the person speaking at City Hall supports transparency, but the verbal onlys work against it. The city pretends to emulate parliamentary tradition, as shown at 450 Broadway in Ottawa, and of course at Westminster. I suggest that it fails. When a bill or law is passed there, it's actually read and debated. There's time between readings for public debate and comment. Here the bylaw number is read, hands are raised 3 times with 0 actual debate and 0 actual reading, which is not the same as the Westminster way. And agreed, you have way more on your plates than you can handle in the meeting time allowed. So maybe there isn't time, but it is just an interesting tradition that we do 3 readings, supposedly. The other one, councillors have been making more use of consent agenda. When I've served on boards, we never had those. But we had things that didn't take very long, just took seconds to go through the routine reappointment of somebody or a list of people. But they were still agenda items, and we didn't debate them, and they didn't take up more than a few seconds, but they're part of the regular agenda. The idea of consent agenda is introduced into the parliamentary system so that when you're reappointing somebody every 2 years, it can be done without debate, and that's good. But to use consent agenda for the most contentious item of the month is perhaps a trick to avoid actual voting and being shown who voted for and against, and to prevent debate on the topic. And in that way, I'd suggest that the use of consent agenda is something maybe you should have a rule to prevent it from being used at all. Because, as I say, in the old days before we started using those, you could quickly dispatch routine stuff without using that. Consent agenda is the opposite of transparent and open government. And if you seek to have good governance, I'd think you'd bring in a rule to forbid this process. Those serving on committees are expected to listen to delegations, and I'm quite sure that you certainly are today, and to feel free to ask questions of delegates. When the meeting chair prevents that half of the delegation process, where no questions are allowed, where there's a thank you and click, and the members on the committee are not allowed to put up a hand.
David,
Yes?
I'm going to
Yes.
stop you right now because you don't seem to have correct information.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you don't know, but you have been presenting to council on many occasions. Number 1, consent and agenda. It is recorded whether the item is stood down or not. If it's consent agenda, each item is still recorded how council voted.
Yes.
Okay. So what
Yes.
you're saying is contradictory. I don't know if you're aware of that, so we can explain it more later offline if you like. When something is not debated and it's consent agenda, it's still recorded as to how someone is voted on council.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. And
Public record, it's available in the minutes. Secondly, questions of delegations.
yes,
Everyone is allowed to ask questions. When you say no questions, that's because nobody in the room has put their hand up to ask a question. Okay, maybe you're not aware of that because you're on the screen and you can't see what's happening in the chamber. It's not the speaker's decision or any one councillor's decision that nobody gets to ask questions. It is up to the councillors if they want to ask questions. And sometimes there's questions, sometimes there is not.
okay.
Do you understand that?
I understand both those topics completely. Now, on the topic of consent agenda, if there are several items, and some of the boards have been part of, have begun using consent agenda to deal with several items at once, if one approves, if one is, things are left on the consent agenda and the agenda is approved, there's an indication that those 4 or 5 items have been approved by the board. And there's no indication of how each person in that assembly voted for each of those agenda items.
If
And that's
it's
the point I was making.
consent,
Yes, there is.
if it's consent, folks have voted for it. They can also be asked to be recorded in opposition. Okay, that means they'd like to be recorded as nay. So that exists right now
Okay,
in the system that we have.
okay.
Okay, you just maybe weren't aware. Just wanted to clarify that for you. So yes, again, I'll say it one more time. During consent agenda, someone might say, record me in opposition to item 3 and 5. That means they're against and the rest of council is for. It's also in the minutes. Maybe you just weren't aware, David. So now you
I guess I wasn't aware, I've only recently, because I think it's been a recent change here, where one looks at the agenda of the item, of the meeting, and within hours of the meeting being over, you can click a button that says minutes, which then gives you some of the proceedings of the meeting right online. And I wasn't aware that button existed until recently. And I wasn't aware that one could go and see how people voted on different items on the page that used to be agenda.
Well, that's great that you discovered that. Very
Yes.
good.
Thank you. And thanks very much for that, for pointing that stuff up. Anyway, so that's, and also to know that theoretically, everyone is still eligible and available to ask questions. Anyway, moving on to equity and the people not wearing political colors and not showing slogans and signs at council meetings, at City Hall. I recall one person tried to show a city document in their presentation, in their delegation. It was on an iPad. And that was considered a waving around a sign, but it was in effect just the city webpage. So there's been fairly strict enforcement of that and of wearing political colors and slogans and so on. There seems to be some inconsistency there. We won't get into debate on that one. It is becoming routine for a councillor to interrupt the delegation and not let them proceed. Usually such dramatic interruption simply indicates that the councillor has an opinion that differs from that of the delegation. And I believe in the previous delegation's discussion, we had that. And if that happens at the end during the questioning of the delegation, that's the sort of thing that Kelly was referring to, and agreed that that isn't optimum and it can take up extra time. But when it occurs during mid-sentence, during the delegation, that a member of the committee decides to interrupt the delegation and not let them proceed. The usual parliamentary method is to say point of order. But when that occurs, and it is just a matter of difference of opinion, I would suggest that that also interferes with the process. And it shows a disrespect for the delegation when they're not allowed to say a certain word, like the word ignore, But anyway, that becomes a thing that I think, when that is well known, I think that sort of thing discourages people from participating as delegations. And I agree that decorum has to be maintained and swearing and incendiary words should be avoided. But where the words are normal and lawful, they should not be forbidden, or publish a list of forbidden words. But to disrupt people in the middle of a comment is somewhere between rude and in violation of your normal processes. So, with having stirred things up, maybe I should stop now. Thank you.
Not too stirred up. Go ahead. Yeah,
Thank you, David. We did ask you some questions already. Is there any other questions?
fair enough.
Not at the moment. Don't know if you're aware, David, but we can't see you very easily. Your screen is very dark. It's
Oh, okay.
particularly very dark today.
Spring sun is coming.
Just letting you know,
Oh,
but
yeah.
is it afternoon?
I think it's the time of day that we have bright sunlight in the backyard and we can't, even with the curtains that come through those curtains. If I have my bigger word processing screen on, it lights me up like a floodlight.
Yeah,
You sort of know what I look like.
Yeah.
Great, David.
And actually, when that's on, I'm a scary ghost-like circle of white and everything else is in darkness. But
The
we
bit
do that
right
at
the
evenings.
moment.
And
It's looking a little bit better right at the moment.
Oh,
Thank you for your
that's my wife holding her camera.
That shit out there.
on.
Thank you for your presentation. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.
That's great. That's funny.
No further delegations registered. This week.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We'll move to the first item. It's the reappointment of the Integrity Commissioner. I'll ask you, Mr. Clerk, to circulate a motion.
Yeah, the motion I believe has been circulated to the members of the committee. It's regarding the appointment of the Integrity Commissioner. And as the committee is aware, on February 22nd, 2017, Council awarded a contract to Sherry Walsh to act as City of Winnipeg's Integrity Commissioner for a 2-year renewable term. The contract allows for Ms. Walsh to be reappointed as Integrity Commissioner for up to 5 additional 2-year terms. And whereas Ms. Walsh was reappointed in 2019, 2021, and 2023, with the latter expiring on March 31st of this year.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Yes, that's the background. Ms. Walsh has been our first Integrity Commissioner and the only one we've had so far here in the city of Winnipeg. And we see this motion that's circulated on the table, and I will be concurring with it. We're moving that we reappoint Ms. Walsh for the next 2-year term. I believe she's been instrumental in the development and implementation of the members of Council Code of Conduct, our bylaw number 19 of 2018. She has consistently delivered exceptional service and guidance to council. She engages with citizens on questions related to the code and has provided advisory bulletins and annual reports to council that have been very detailed. So this particular motion is asking for a 2-year term commencing April 1st, 2025. And also in item 2 here, the subject of approval, we want to delegate the authority to the city clerk in consultation with this committee to negotiate and approve the terms and conditions of this 2-year extension commencing April 1st, 2025. And the budget will remain as the same as prior, the overall budget. And so I will, the motion's on the table. Any further discussion?
No discussion for me. I'd like to move if everyone's finished. No other discussion? Okay, I'd like to move this motion. I think it's a great motion.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary, carried. This will go up to EPC and on to council.
Correct.
Thank you. Next is the City of Winnipeg Governance Review, Governance Committee Recommendations. Been waiting for this report. Mr. Clerk, if you could give us a summary.
Sure. As the committee is aware, the City of Winnipeg Governance Review conducted by MNP found that overall the City of Winnipeg's governance framework is consistent with other jurisdictions across the country. But MNP also provided 15 recommendations on where the city could further strengthen its processes. To date, 6 of the 15 recommendations have been implemented. The Governance Committee's report addresses each of those 15 recommendations, as well as a council motion on the transfer of jurisdiction of audit matters to the Governance Committee. And it also provides 8 recommendations for council's consideration, which I will go through now. In order to ensure councillors are apprised of potential changes in their wards, recommendation 1 is directing that the public service consult with the applicable area councillors before reports on service cuts or land use matters are submitted to committee. That is, with the exception of reports that are the subject of a public hearing. This consultation should also be confirmed in the report in keeping with the existing practice for certain real estate matters. The City of Winnipeg Charter also grants the mayor the authority to appoint key positions, including deputy mayor, acting deputy mayor, and standing committee chairs. M&P recommended that capping the mayor's appointment power to ensure that the mayor and the appointed members do not exceed 50% of council in order to promote consensus building and broaden engagement. Implementing this change would require an amendment to the City of Winnipeg Charter. The Governance Committee recommendation 2 is to request that the province amend the charter to limit the mayor's appointment authority to 5 members of council as standing committee chairs, with also one of those members serving as deputy mayor and another as acting deputy mayor. The committee is also requesting that the charter be amended to allow the city to determine its own committee structure and composition. M&P also noted the absence of representation of different wards on EPC, which can limit diverse perspectives on city decision-making. The Governance Committee agrees and is recommending that when making appointments to the Executive Policy Committee, the mayor consider having all wards represented over time. M&P suggested discontinuing the role of community committees in the development application process, as considering development applications in their wards can make it difficult for councillors to maintain a whole city view and lead to inconsistent decision-making. M&P recommended that a neutral planning commission with technical expertise be established to evaluate applications, with recommendations bypassing standing committee and EPC and being submitted directly to council. The city is currently looking at amending zoning regulations to allow as-of-right development, which, if approved, would reduce the number of applications considered by community committees. Additionally, a full rewrite of the downtown Winnipeg zoning bylaw is expected by 2027, which could further impact the development process. As a result, the Governance Committee recommendation 4 is that prior to the consideration of the establishment of a planning commission, the Winnipeg Public Service be directed to report back to council 1 year after the completion of the Winnipeg zoning bylaw rewrites, with an analysis on changes which impact the development application public hearing process. The Government Committee believes that it is important for council to engage in meaningful dialogue with Indigenous communities, as it provides a platform for Indigenous voices to be heard in the decision-making process. Accordingly, recommendation 5 requests the Indigenous Relations Division to facilitate annual meetings between Indigenous elders and council to discuss pertinent issues. Recommendations 6A and B seek to formalize and improve transparency in council leaves of absence procedures. Currently, the City of Winnipeg Charter allows council to authorize absences but lacks specific criteria. M&P suggests that amending the procedure bylaw to define valid reasons for absences and ensure consistency across council and committees. The Governance Committee agrees and is also recommending that recording in the minutes when members arrive and leave meetings before they adjourn. The committee also noted that of the 9 cities reviewed, only 3 cities allow delegations at council meetings, and Winnipeg is the only one that allows delegations to speak for 10 minutes. All other cities reviewed allow 5 minutes. The committee believes that reducing speaking times offers several benefits, including improved clarity, efficiency, and engagement. It encourages speakers to focus on key points, making their message more concise and impactful. Accordingly, the Governance Committee is recommending Governance Committee recommendation 6C is to amend the procedure bylaw to set a total speaking time limit for delegations and public hearings and public hearing representations at council and committee meetings to 5 minutes, regardless of whether the delegation is speaking to one or multiple items, plus any extensions as may be granted, up to a maximum of a total additional 5 minutes. Recommendation 7A is regarding the practice where members, or rather where the public service reports are informally reviewed before being placed on a public agenda. And although the mayor has implemented an informal process to document politically directed changes to reports, there is value in having this process formalized. The Governance Committee is recommending that the organizational bylaw be amended to require that any political direction to amend administrative reports after they've been submitted to the mayor's office be documented in the subject report. And finally, the committee also considered a council motion which called for the transfer jurisdiction of audit matters from the Executive Policy Committee to the Governance Committee of Council. A review of 5 other Canadian cities, which included audit committees and they're structured, showed that ours is similar, with 3 of the cities including citizen members. The committee found that, or the Governance Committee found that there would be value in having an audit committee which not solely composed of members of the Executive Policy Committee and also includes external members with a financial and legal background. As a result, the Governance Committee is recommending that the city organizational bylaw be amended to transfer the jurisdiction of audit matters currently delegated to the Executive Policy Committee to a new audit committee comprised of the following members to be appointed by council beginning of November of 2025. And the membership would be the mayor as chairperson, 2 councillors who do not sit on the Executive Policy Committee, 1 citizen member with a professional designation in law, and 1 citizen member with a professional designation in accounting. That is a summation of the recommendations the committee has brought forward. Madam Chair?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Clerk, for summarizing the report. Take some questions, comments. Councillor Orlando.
I'll be supporting this today. I still have some questions on this one. And one I just heard right now was regarding the reports. I think it's very wise that the administrative reports, if they are changed at EPC, when they have their meetings for political reasons and wordsmithing reasons too. And that's very important. So we don't have this conspiracy theory, get a little confused. Sometimes people think EPC changed reports when I was off EPC, when I was on EPC, it doesn't really matter. But this helps alleviate some of those concerns. My question though, I just came to my head right now, which I was always scared to ask, is does the mayor's office, prior to those reports being submitted, have the opportunity to see them and change them?
The mayor's office themselves?
Yeah.
So the reports are submitted to the CAO's office through the report information system. And then at that time, I think that they're reviewed, not all of them, some of them might be reviewed for multiple departments, and then they would be submitted to the mayor's office.
So the mayor's
And then
office.
the mayor's office would release them for publication on an agenda in keeping with the bylaw.
So a simple question, and again, you may not have the answer today, is they said that when they submit the report. So, but prior to submit the report, they go out for feedback, sometimes to departments. I understand that's very important. Does the mayor's office part of that feedback loop prior to the report getting submitted?
We'd have to go back to find out.
Please do. Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, we could talk about some items, elaborate on them.
Absolutely.
Our DEMA system is going to be updated later this year or next year to make the search capabilities more user-friendly.
Correct.
Similar to Google. Can you speak about
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, sure.
Good thing for the public.
Well, for us. Yeah.
So that was in response to, and thank you for that. That was in response to also one of the recommendations that came through the governance review, I believe is recommendation 3, one of the 6 recommendations that has already been implemented. Is that, I apologize, recommendation 10, increase accessibility of council meeting information to the public. So the City of Winnipeg DEMA system is a system that was developed, I believe, in 2002, and is written in code that not many people in IT understand anymore and can work with. And although our IT department has done an absolutely incredible job of keeping this system on life support, it is getting to a point where there are multiple failures that really don't get a lot of don't see that to what you see here. But thankfully, council has approved a budget to have the Demas system rewritten. We are currently in the process. One of the biggest complaints is the search feature. In Demas, people find it hard to search for information, and that is something that is being developed to be more in line with what people are used to, similar to Google searches. And that is something that we are hoping to bring forward by the end of this year, and I believe at latest at the beginning of 2026.
Very good, thank you. And linking Demas to committee agenda items, that's happening or will be happening, so it's easy to get to the item that one's looking for.
Correct. Some of the problems, one of the things that people suggested, also another recommendation, is ensuring that the results of public input on a matter before council are readily accessible to council, recommendation 13. And then that would, as an item goes up to council from committee, there might be submissions made at a certain level, delegations made at a certain level that might not necessarily be readily available to council. The news Demas will allow us to provide direct links to that information so that councilors and members of the public could directly access it.
Thank you. The recommendation on page 2, the reason for limiting the appointment authority is to have more collaboration amongst council, not less. You know, and we're striving towards representing EPC on each community committee. I think that was listed in here.
Correct.
It's good to see Councillor Eady appointed recently, representing Lord Selkirk West Kildonan Community Committee.
Correct.
That was good. Okay. The audit committee, we likely, if we put that recommendation forward, probably need a little bit more work done on it in terms of a report back on how this would actually work with citizen members.
Yes. So.
And the reporting relationship between the committee and council. So can we maybe look at perhaps outlining that in this report?
Yeah, it would be a good idea. I mean, we believe that we would have to come back with additional information on the appointment process for the two citizen members specifically. Would the appointment process be done through the boards and commissions process? Would this be recommendations that could come forward from the governing bodies for these two specific occupations through the Law Society of Manitoba or through another organization? So that's something that we're going to have to go back and determine how that's going to be done, which would ultimately be a report back to council for implementation as well.
Very good. Okay, so I'd like to see that amendment. So just so we can clarify that we do need the report back. Any other questions? Just while you're thinking, I just want to say a lot of work's gone into this report from the members around this table and previously those that sat on the governance committee. Council as a whole got together, I believe it was last year, to look at a version of this report. And we've asked them for feedback ongoing. So a very important report. We've linked with various departments that came and gave us presentations, and that's how we arrived at some of these recommendations. It's also very important to note, as you did, Mr. Clerk, already, that we've implemented 6 of the recommendations. So although we've been working on the report in parallel time, we've been chipping away and getting things done.
Correct.
And moving them forward and implementing them.
Yep.
Just so we're not waiting to do everything,
All at once.
you know. I'm just going to look through the report. Any further questions? No. This is good. Then we'll go up to EPC and on to council. And I want to thank the clerks, your time, Mr. Clerk, and your time, Mr. Boisterous. Yeah, ton of work that's gone into this. Yes, what amendment? I've got something drafted there. If you could read it, Mr. Clerk.
Absolutely.
Relative to the audit committee.
So then the recommendation is that the recommendation of the governance committee be concurred in with the following amendment. Add the following new recommendation 8 and renumber the remaining recommendation accordingly. That prior to November of 2025, the Winnipeg Public Service be directed to report back to council through the governance committee with recommendations for appointing citizen members to the audit committee and the reporting relationship between council and the committee.
Thank you. Councilor Orlico, will you take the chair?
Sure.
Okay. I'd like to move the report as amended. You've got the amendment there that was read into the record, and again, going to continue to have more dialogue. We're going to send this up to Executive Policy Committee and then on to Council. These recommended changes that the Governance Committee is bringing forward are designed to make our governance framework more transparent, efficient, and accountable to the public. They reflect our commitment to continuous improvement and responsible decision-making. I believe these are very sound recommendations as we work towards a more responsive and inclusive government. And it's all for the people of Winnipeg. Again, I look forward to speaking to my colleagues since this has been tabled. They're aware of the report. We've reached out, and we'll have a final debate on the floor of council. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none on the amendment, all in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Back to you, Madam Chair. I'll move the item as amended. All support?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Carried. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And that concludes our business for today's meeting.
Correct.
Okay. Councillor Schreier moves adjournment.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary? That's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.